Now then, let's talk about how to make Monster Hunter Wilds better. Or at least potentially better, or at least avoid a big problem that I see potentially maybe coming. In a tweet today, the official Monster Hunter account talked a little about how the open world was going to work, and there's a big question I have that I'd really like an answer to, because it could mean a big problem for the game, and I'm quite worried about what it means. And first off, yes, for those of you keeping tabs on the game, I know it's not actually a true, quote-unquote true, open world game. It's more like an open field game, where map areas or zones are progressively unlocked for discrete access as the core game progresses. But every single damn time I say open field, I get people asking me what that means, because for whatever reason, that term, despite its concept being a long, long way from being new, novel, or even rare in gaming, hasn't quite stuck in the minds of the average gamer. So now I just say open world and then open field, and then feel compelled to explain what open field means in the hopes of a few more people hook onto the idea. I'm just doing my part, fellow core gamers, educating the fresh meat, leading by example, as it were. Give me a thumbs up and a sub and a bell for my efforts. I'm trying here, all right? Hello again. I am Blunty. Now, where the hell was I? Oh yes, big problem. The official account, talking about how the new gameplay loop works in the open field style gameplay, said, Monster Hunter Wilds features a seamless hunting experience, keeping you fully immersed in the world. It includes uninterrupted hunting in the locale from quest to quest, ideal for a good hunting session solo or with friends. So, locale, presumably that will be the official terminology used for the open field areas, the maps, the zones. And this isn't new information. We got to look at this idea from the recent hands-off live gameplay demonstration certain press got and reported on. And presumably, come late August with Gamescom in Germany, we'll get even more feedback about it, because there has been promised some hands-on demo time available for Wilds. But I've been thinking about this seamless hunting experience a lot since it was confirmed, because, and I promise I'm getting to it, there is potentially a very big problem here. But what will it look like? What will it feel like? And how will it interact with the multiplayer aspect of the game is where we begin. Will it work like the Guiding Lands did at the end game of Monster Hunter World's Iceborne expansion, where players can drop in and drop out of a public player-hosted session of the titular Guiding Lands, and it's up to those in the session on if they want to engage with one another at all or coordinate on the various monster spawns collectively. And most of the time, it's the latter. People just come together and all group hunt. After all, what's the point of joining a multiplayer session if you're just going to pot around doing your own thing and not cooperate while the other players work together on monster takedowns? But there's no drive towards that. There's no quest. There's no stated specific objective. You don't have to do this monster in this order, or how many of these monsters or whatever it is. It's just a map zone you go to where up to 4 players can do whatever for however long they like, and there's no time limit there. However, Wilds is said to have significantly larger maps, zones, locales. In fact, a Capcom spokesperson is on record as claiming the maps are, quote, a little more than twice the size of previous games. And that's a pretty big problem if this game works the same as older games do in one core way. You see, in multiplayer hunts, at least in Monster Hunter World and Monster Hunter Rise and their respective expansions, Iceborne and Sunbreak, something very important happens. The difficulty scales to match the player numbers. In World, there was a scaling for solo play, for 2 players, and a final singular scaling for 3 and 4 players. That is to say, there was not a different scaling for 3 and 4 players, there was one scaling for both 3 or 4 players. And when World launched, that became a problem, because if someone dropped out of a hunt midway through, either deliberately or by accidental disconnect or whatever, the monster did not scale back down again to a player-appropriate level. So if you're in a 4-player hunt, and half those people drop out, or 3 people drop out, you're suddenly a single person fighting a 4-player difficulty monster. It wasn't awesome. In fact, it was pretty annoying. So annoying, the outcry from the players at frustration of this made Capcom pay attention to the issue, and when Iceborne launched, it patched this behavior for better scaling. Difficulty would now dynamically scale up and down again, depending on the number of players present. However, it was still only scaled to 1, 2, or 3 and 4 players, which was always a really weird choice to me. Why wouldn't you just scale 3 and 4 players separately? Monster Hunter Rise, however, made it work much better again, dynamically scaling for 1, 2, 3, and 4 players, discreetly this time, automatically scaling up and back down again if people joined or dropped or rejoined or replaced with the other players or whatever it was. However many players were on that map, that's what the monsters were scaled to at all times. It worked superbly. Now, let's put all that back into the context of Wilds. I'm sure they'll use Rise-style scaling, at least I really hope they do, because it's simply the most logical and even-handed approach to it. So not a problem there. They've got that issue solved. Now, down, done. But with map sizes so large, even with the new Secret Mount monster to make navigation and terrain negotiation faster, it could easily mean players can take quite some time to collect together to be at a singular monster to fight it together, or possibly not bother to try and reach a monster at all if it's too far away. It's on the other side of the map, and you know you're currently engaged with a different thing. You're fighting some small monsters, you're collecting some stuff, you're doing some resource, whatever. And you're just thinking, well, by the time I get there, there's no point. It's going to take me a couple of minutes to get there, and the hunt's going to be halfway over. It's, why bother? And just not join the hunt at all. Now, according to in-game law, it is forbidden by the Monster Hunter Guild for any hunting party to exceed 4 members. And 4 players isn't very many on a map that is more than twice the size of Worlds maps, especially in places like the Coral Highlands or the Ancient Forest, where the cluttered terrain and narrow pathways and significant verticality make getting from Cab to the far reaches of the map, it can mean that's 3 or 4 minutes of travel time on their own at best pace. And that's if you know the map well enough. And that could, in many cases of, standard monsters, be half the full hunt time. Maybe more than half. By the time you're in mid-game, hunts should be taking between, 4 and maybe 10 minutes-ish. And the travel time issue only gets worse in the larger zones of Wilds. So, if Wilds uses the old scaling methods of scaling monster difficulty depending on how many players are in the current session, the difficulty level becomes potentially unbalanced, uneven, and unreliable. And if Wilds does something new and treats the public locale as if it was a lobby in World, meaning, say, up to 16 players can be present, that means up to 4 separate teams of 4 can take on their own local monsters, but then what if 5, 6, 7, or 8 players all converge on a single monster? That would potentially trivialize the fight with existing scaling methods. Here's the thing though, and here's what I keep thinking about. There's another game out there, one born inspired by Monster Hunter itself, and which had ex-Capcom employees who helped create it in the first place, in fact. And it has a solve for issues of this kind, of large shared maps and multiple monster hunts within those shared maps. The game is called Dauntless. And when it started, it was much like Monster Hunter in that it had moderately sized maps, and teams of up to 4 would all go in a singular hunt for a singular behemoth, aka a monster. You'd depart from the hub town, the hunt would happen, people could join midway through if the team wasn't full, and at the end of the hunt, you'd all go back to the hub town and select a new hunt, and away you'd go again. Very much like Monster Hunter. That was in the early days though, from the 2018 beta through the 2019 launch. But in late 2020, in December, they updated the game to replace certain aspects of how hunts work and introduced the hunting grounds. These were significantly larger maps that could hold up to 6 players at a time and would continuously spawn new monsters as older ones were defeated, a little bit like the Guiding Lands. It was designed for unlimited playtime on any zone. You just stay there fighting the roster of local behemoths as long as you felt like it, and left when you were done. People could drop in and drop out completely dynamically. And they fixed the scaling issue we've been talking about by making each behemoth dynamically scale, much in the same way that Monster Hunter Rise would later do, fully dynamically. There was even an indicator on the UI which told you exactly how many players the monster was currently scaled to. But the real trick was this. It didn't scale to how many players were in the current session. It scaled depending on how many players were engaging the monster in a hyper-local zone. So if someone else was, say, nearby, but not actually fighting, it didn't count them towards the scaling. So with up to 6 hunters, a monster or behemoth would be appropriately scaled no matter what they were all doing. 3 teams of 2 could all be fighting different behemoths in separate areas, and they would all each scale correctly to 2 players. If 5 people were taking on one monster and a single player was soloing something else in the neighboring area, it was all scaled correctly to 5 and 1 player respectively. And of course it dynamically changes if people arrive or leave the current engagement. And it works really well. It is a brilliant and simple and very smooth solution for this issue. So I would like to see Wilds do something like this. And I'm sure Monster Hunter hardcore types will balk at the thought of potentially nuking a monster with, 6 or 8 more players all squatting up on it. But there is some precedent for this in older titles. Internet chocolate chip cookie points for those of you who can make those exceptions in the down below. When the lore of 4 from the guild was broken. But if scaling is done right, done carefully, it could really work. I'm not convinced that a 16-player locale hub lobby style thing is the right move here. I know a lot of players, especially those who came on board with World, really want the 16-player lobby back. But I think 16 is too many for these shared open zones. But 6, like Dauntless has, seems like it could balance well. Maybe even 8. At the very least, 6 or 8 could work well in, mid, late, and end game stages. Maybe different locales could have different caps on how many players could be there. But this could both make the hunting feel even more dynamic, as your local teammates would potentially cycle out, filtering into different, ad hoc teams, changing who you're fighting besides as you go around to different monsters, smacking down low threat monsters with just, 1 or 2 players, and all gravitating towards high threat monsters and special appearance monsters when they arrive. Because we already know certain monsters, certain, big deal monsters will only appear when particular local weather conditions happen. And there is a dynamic weather system in the game. So maybe that's when all 6 hunters come together and then team up on this big deal monster and then separate again afterwards in their own different directions for less demanding hunting. Or maybe I'm just underestimating just how fast and dynamic the Psychic Ride-On partner actually is, and that between that and the temporary camps we can set up and accompanying fast travel points we get up with those temporary camps, all of that will counter the large map size good enough. But at that point, what's the larger map even for, if not to make things feel huge and immersive and, like you're on a massive area of the world? I mean, if the maps are bigger, but you get across it twice as fast, there's no real point to the map in being twice as large, is there? Kind of self-defeating. So there are a few very important questions where we're still waiting on answers for in how these systems are going to work in this new game. I don't know whether we'll get them at Gamescom. I sure hope we do, because I've been thinking a lot about this, and I sure would love to think about other things. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the down below, of course. Thank you for watching and listening. And thank you, as always, to the patrons scrolling away up above there, whose above and beyond support is very much appreciated. Catch you next time.